The autumn evening was drawing to a close as Michelle Thompson hurried out of the corner store, clutching a brown paper bag containing children's medicine and a few essential groceries. Her youngest daughter's fever hadn't broken all day, and she needed to get home quickly. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows across the suburban sidewalk. At 32, Michelle had mastered the art of juggling life as a single mother of 3 while working 2 jobs. Her schedule was a carefully orchestrated dance between her day job as a medical receptionist and evening shifts at a local diner. Tonight was supposed to be her shift at the diner, but her 6-year-old's sudden illness had forced her to call in. Officer Robert Chen was 3 months into his job at the Springfield Police Department. Fresh out of the academy, he was eager to prove himself to his superiors. His training officer had emphasized the importance of being vigilant about suspicious behavior in this neighborhood, which had seen a slight uptick in shoplifting cases over the past month. As Michelle speedwalked past the darkening storefronts, she repeatedly checked her phone, worried about the babysitter's updates about her daughter's temperature. Lost in her concerns, she didn't notice when her receipt flew out of the loosely closed paper bag, carried away by the evening breeze. Officer Chen, parked in his patrol car across the street, observed Michelle's hurried pace and the falling paper. In his mind, trained to spot potential suspicious behavior, her quick steps and the dropped paper registered as possible shoplifting indicators. Without waiting to verify his suspicions with the store, he turned on his lights and pulled up beside her. "Ma'am, stop right there," his voice carried across the empty street, startling Michelle out of her worried thoughts. She froze, clutching her bag tighter, her heart suddenly racing. The young officer's approach was unnecessarily aggressive, his hand hovering near his belt in a way that made Michelle's blood run cold. What followed was a series of miscommunications and assumptions. Officer Chen demanded to see inside her bag and her receipt, which was now somewhere down the street. Michelle tried to explain about her sick daughter, reaching for her phone to show the text messages from her babysitter, but Chen interpreted her movement as a threat. Before she could fully process what was happening, Michelle found herself being handcuffed and read her rights, all while trying to explain that she had the receipt, that she was just a mother trying to get medicine to her sick child. Her pleas fell on deaf ears as Officer Chen, convinced he had caught a shoplifter, called for backup. The store's security cameras had captured everything: Michelle's proper purchase, her polite interaction with the cashier, and even the moment the receipt slipped from her bag. But in those crucial minutes on the street, none of that mattered. She was placed in the back of a police car, her groceries and medicine confiscated as evidence, while her sick daughter waited at home. News of the incident spread quickly through Springfield's tight-knit community. The store owner, Mr. Patel, was closing up when he heard about the arrest. He immediately reached out to the police station with security footage, but the wheels of the system had already begun turning. Michelle spent a horrifying night in holding, separated from her children, all because of a lost receipt and a rookie officer's overzealousness. The story might have ended there, another statistic in the system, if not for the wisdom and attention of Judge Patricia Washington, who would soon become involved in a case that would challenge the community's understanding of justice, prejudice, and the importance of seeing beyond first impressions. The events of that autumn evening would spark a conversation much larger than a simple misunderstanding between a police officer and a mother. It would become a catalyst for change in how the Springfield Police Department trained its officers, particularly in community relations and the dangers of implicit bias. But first, Michelle Thompson would have to navigate a system that seemed designed to work against her, armed with nothing but the truth and the support of unexpected allies. The fluorescent lights of the police station holding cell buzzed incessantly as Michelle spent the longest night of her life away from her children. Her mind raced with worries about her sick daughter, her other kids, and the babysitter who hadn't signed up for an overnight stay. The cold metal bench offered no comfort as she waited for morning, her requests to make a phone call repeatedly delayed by bureaucratic procedures. Meanwhile, across town, the incident was causing ripples through the community. Mr. Patel, the store owner, couldn't sleep either. After providing the security footage to the police station, he spent hours trying to reach someone in authority who would listen. His conscience wouldn't let him rest, knowing that a regular customer, someone he saw almost daily, was sitting in a cell for a purchase he knew she had made. "This is completely unacceptable," Mr. Patel told his wife as he paced their living room. "She bought the medicine for her sick child. I rang her up myself." His wife urged him to wait until morning, but he kept making calls, determined to right this wrong. The babysitter, Jenny Rodriguez, had managed to reach Michelle's sister, who lived 2 hours away. By midnight, Aunt Teresa had arrived to take care of the children, but the damage was already done. Michelle's oldest child, a 12-year-old who understood too well what it meant when police took someone away, had stayed awake, watching the door, waiting for news about his mother. At the police station, the night shift sergeant finally reviewed the security footage Mr. Patel had sent. The evidence was clear: Michelle had paid for every item in her bag. The receipt flying away was visible on camera, as was her obvious distraction with her phone, checking messages about her sick child. The sergeant, a 20-year veteran named David O'Connor, felt his stomach sink as he watched the footage. Officer Chen sat at his desk, completing paperwork, still convinced he had made the right call. His training officer, Lieutenant Sandra Rivera, watched him with growing concern. She had arrived shortly after the arrest but hadn't been able to intervene in time. Now, seeing the young officer's rigid certainty despite mounting evidence to the contrary, she recognized a teachable moment approaching, one that would either make or break his career. "Chen," Lieutenant Rivera called him over. "Let's review something." She pulled up the security footage on her computer. "Watch this with fresh eyes. Tell me what you see." As they reviewed the footage together, Officer Chen's confidence began to crumble. The timestamp showed Michelle making her purchase, her interaction with Mr. Patel clearly visible. The receipt slipping away was caught from multiple angles. Most damning was his own approach. On camera, his aggressive stance and immediate escalation looked far more threatening than he had realized in the moment. I thought. He stammered, his face growing pale as the reality of his mistake sank in. "You thought you saw what you expected to see," Lieutenant Rivera said firmly but not unkindly. "This is why we emphasize thorough investigation before action. One phone call to the store could have prevented this entire situation." By dawn, word of the incident had spread through social media. Local community activists were already gathering outside the police station, demanding Michelle's release. Among them was Reverend James Bradley, a respected community leader who had seen too many similar incidents in his 30 years of ministry. The local news had picked up the story, with headlines highlighting the security footage that proved Michelle's innocence. The contrast between her actual purchase and her treatment was striking, raising uncomfortable questions about police training and racial bias in the department. Judge Patricia Washington arrived at her chambers early that morning to find multiple messages about the case. Known for her fair-minded approach and unwavering commitment to justice, she immediately requested all available information. As she reviewed the security footage and arrest report, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Get me the DA on the phone," she instructed her clerk. "And find out if Ms. Thompson has legal representation yet. This needs to be addressed immediately." The district attorney, Michael Harrison, was already dealing with a flood of calls about the case. The security footage made it impossible to pursue any charges, but simply dropping them didn't feel like enough. This incident had exposed several systemic issues that needed addressing. In the holding cell, Michelle finally received word that she was being released. Her relief was tempered by exhaustion and anger, emotions she couldn't afford to show as a black woman in custody, even when being cleared of wrongdoing. As she collected her belongings, she overheard officers discussing the community protest outside. The morning light revealed dozens of supporters gathered peacefully, holding signs demanding justice. Among them were faces Michelle recognized, parents from her children's school, regulars from the diner where she worked, and even some of her medical office colleagues who had come straight from their night shifts. Mr. Patel was there too, clutching copies of the security footage and receipt records. When he saw Michelle emerging from the station, he rushed forward, but was held back by the police line. "I have all the proof," he called out. "We'll make this right." As Michelle stepped into the morning sun, she was immediately embraced by her sister Teresa, who had brought fresh clothes and news about the children. Her 6-year-old's fever had broken during the night, but all 3 kids were asking for their mother. The media cameras captured her dignified exit, her sister's protective arm around her shoulders, and the spontaneous applause from the gathered crowd. But they also caught something unexpected: Officer Chen, against his superior's advice, stepping forward to face Michelle. The young officer's next actions would surprise everyone present, setting in motion a chain of events that would reach far beyond that morning's release. Judge Washington, watching the news footage in her chambers, saw an opportunity for something more than just justice, a chance for real change in how law enforcement and the community interacted. But first, there would need to be accountability, and the system that had allowed this incident to happen would face its own trial in the court of public opinion and the law. Officer Chen's unexpected approach toward Michelle in front of the police station created a moment of tension that seemed to freeze time. The crowd fell silent, cameras focused, and Lieutenant Rivera took an instinctive step forward, ready to intervene. But what happened next would become a turning point in this unfolding story. "Ms. Thompson," Officer Chen spoke, his voice carrying in the morning quiet. "I made a terrible mistake last night. I acted on assumptions instead of facts, and I caused harm to you and your family. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that I was wrong, and I will accept whatever consequences come from my actions." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but Michelle wasn't ready to offer forgiveness. She looked at the young officer, seeing not just the uniform now, but someone's son who had much to learn about the world. "You're right," she replied steadily, "sorry isn't enough. My children spent the night wondering if their mother was coming home, all because you didn't take 5 minutes to check the facts." Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine Walsh, a civil rights attorney who had been contacted by Reverend Bradley during the night. She quickly took charge of the situation, addressing both the media and the police department's waiting public relations team. "While we appreciate Officer Chen's apology, this incident represents more than just one mistake," Walsh stated firmly. "This is about systemic issues that need addressing. We'll be filing a formal complaint and pursuing all legal avenues to ensure this type of incident doesn't happen to another family." Inside her chambers, Judge Patricia Washington was already formulating an unconventional approach. After reviewing similar cases from across the country, she recognized that the usual outcomes, either a lawsuit ending in a settlement with no real changes, or the officer facing punishment without addressing the underlying issues, wouldn't serve true justice here. She called a meeting with the police chief, the district attorney, and the city's legal department. "We have an opportunity here," she began, spreading out the case files on her conference table. "This incident has all the elements needed for meaningful change, including an officer willing to acknowledge his mistake and a victim who deserves more than just monetary compensation." Meanwhile, Michelle's story was resonating throughout the community. Her co-workers at both the medical office and the diner had organized a support network, ensuring her children were cared for while she dealt with the legal aftermath. Local mothers started a social media campaign sharing their own stories of prejudice and profiling, turning Michelle's experience into a rallying point for change. Mr. Patel had become an unexpected advocate, speaking to anyone who would listen about Michelle's character and the need for police to build real relationships with the community they served. His security footage had become a teaching tool, with local news stations using it to demonstrate how quickly assumptions and bias could escalate a simple situation. The police department was facing its own internal reckoning. Lieutenant Rivera had begun reviewing Officer Chen's academy training, identifying gaps in the curriculum around community relations and bias recognition. "We're training officers to look for threats," she observed during a staff meeting, but we're not teaching them how to look for humanity. 3 days after the incident, Judge Washington made an unprecedented move. Rather than allowing the case to proceed along traditional lines, she proposed a community justice resolution program, a series of structured meetings between Officer Chen, Michelle, and various community members, supervised by trained mediators and legal observers. This isn't about avoiding consequences, she explained to the skeptical parties. It's about creating meaningful change. Officer Chen will still face disciplinary action, but he'll also have to truly understand the impact of his actions. Ms. Thompson will have a voice in shaping department policies, and the community will be involved in rebuilding trust. The proposal met with mixed reactions. Some activists argued it wasn't punitive enough, while others saw the potential for real systemic change. Michelle, after careful consideration and discussions with her attorney, agreed to participate, with conditions. "I want my children to see justice done," she explained to Catherine Walsh. "Not just punishment, but real change. They need to know that speaking up and standing firm can make a difference." Officer Chen's agreement to participate came with its own revelations. During his first session with the program's mediator, he spoke about his immigrant parents' emphasis on authority and order, and how his desire to prove himself had overshadowed his duty to protect and serve. The local media's coverage of the innovative program drew national attention. Other jurisdictions began reaching out to Judge Washington, interested in how this approach might work in their communities. But the judge remained focused on the case at hand, knowing that success here could pave the way for broader changes. As the structured meetings began, Michelle found herself facing not just Officer Chen, but representatives from every level of the system that had failed her that night. The discussions were sometimes heated, often emotional, but always focused on understanding and improvement. "Tell me about your daughter," Judge Washington had asked during one session, directing the question to Michelle. "The one who was sick that night." As Michelle described her little girl's fever, her worry as a mother, and the terror of being separated from her children, the room fell silent. It was no longer about policies and procedures, it was about a mother trying to care for her sick child, and how quickly that simple human moment had been lost in a cascade of assumptions. The process wasn't easy. Some days, Michelle left the meetings feeling drained and wondering if any real change was possible. Officer Chen struggled with defensive reactions, having to repeatedly confront his own biases and preconceptions. But slowly, something began to shift in how both parties saw each other and the possibility for change. Lieutenant Rivera, who attended many of the sessions, began implementing immediate changes in how officers were supervised during their probationary period. The department's training programs were being revamped, with input from community members and a new emphasis on de-escalation and cultural competency. As the program progressed, Judge Washington's innovative approach was proving to be more than just an alternative to traditional punishment, it was becoming a model for how communities could address similar incidents. But the real test would come in the weeks ahead, as the program moved toward its conclusion and all parties would have to decide what justice truly looked like in this case. 2 weeks into Judge Washington's community justice program, the initial skepticism began giving way to cautious optimism. The structured meetings had moved from the sterile conference rooms of the courthouse to the community center, a symbolic shift that didn't go unnoticed by participants or observers. Michelle's oldest child had asked to address one of the sessions, a request that sparked intense debate among the adults involved. Judge Washington, after consulting with child psychologists and Michelle, made a controversial decision to allow it, understanding that the 12-year-old's perspective was crucial to comprehending the full impact of that night. "I thought they were going to make my mom disappear," the boy said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "I've seen it on the news. Sometimes people go to jail and don't come back, even when they didn't do anything wrong." His words cut through the professional facades of everyone present, including Officer Chen, who had to step out of the room to compose himself. The police department's internal investigation had concluded, recommending disciplinary action for Officer Chen. However, Judge Washington's program had become part of his official record as well, with his willing participation and progress being considered in the final determination of consequences. Lieutenant Rivera had taken the initiative to create a new training module based on the incident. "We're calling it the receipt protocol," she explained during a department-wide briefing. "It's not just about checking receipts, it's about checking our assumptions and taking the time to verify before escalating situations." The program's success was drawing attention from unexpected quarters. A state senator had visited one of the sessions, sitting quietly in the back as community members shared their experiences with law enforcement. The following week, she introduced legislation to fund similar programs across the state. Mr. Patel's role had evolved from witness to active participant in community policing initiatives. His store had become a model for business-police cooperation, hosting monthly meetings where officers could interact with community members in a casual setting. "We need to know each other as people first," he often said, "before we see each other as roles or uniforms." Michelle's life had begun to shift in unexpected ways as well. The publicity surrounding her case had led to job offers from organizations focused on social justice and community relations. While she kept her position at the medical office, she accepted a part-time role as a community liaison, helping to bridge the gap between law enforcement and local residents. The most profound changes were happening in the quieter moments of the program. During one session, Officer Chen shared a personal revelation that silenced the room. "I realized that in trying to be a perfect police officer, I forgot to be a decent human being. When Ms. Thompson reached for her phone that night, I saw a threat because that's what my training had conditioned me to see. I didn't see a mother worried about her sick child." The program's meditation sessions, initially met with skepticism, had become valuable spaces for processing the heavy emotions stirred up by the discussions. Michelle found herself staying after one session, watching as Officer Chen struggled with his own reflection. "You know what the hardest part is," she said, surprising both him and herself by initiating the conversation. "Explaining to my kids that they have to trust the police, even after what happened. They need to know they can call 911 if they're in danger, but they're scared now." This conversation led to one of the program's most significant initiatives. With input from child psychologists and education experts, a new curriculum was developed for both police training and school programs, focusing on building trust while acknowledging past wrongs. Judge Washington's chambers had become a hub of activity, with requests for information about the program pouring in from jurisdictions across the country. She maintained her focus on the case at hand, but began documenting the process for future reference. "What we're doing here isn't just about one incident," she explained to her clerk. "We're creating a template for how justice can work when we prioritize healing over punishment." The local media's continued coverage of the program took an interesting turn when they discovered that Officer Chen had enrolled in evening classes in social work. "I need to understand people better," he explained simply when asked about it. "Being a good police officer isn't just about enforcing laws, it's about serving the community." As the program entered its final weeks, the changes were becoming measurable. The police department reported a significant decrease in complaint filings, while community feedback surveys showed improved trust levels. More importantly, informal interactions between officers and residents had become noticeably more relaxed and positive. Michelle's children had begun to heal as well. Her youngest, now fully recovered from the fever that had sparked the incident, no longer hid when police cars passed their house. The middle child had written an essay about the experience for school, focusing not on the arrest but on how the community had come together afterward. Lieutenant Rivera's receipt protocol had been officially adopted by the department, with additional training modules addressing implicit bias and community relations. Officer Chen's body camera footage from the night of the arrest was now being used in these training sessions, with his permission and Michelle's approval. The program's impact extended beyond its immediate participants. Other officers began voluntarily attending the community sessions, leading to organic conversations about improving police-community relations. Local businesses, inspired by Mr. Patel's example, started their own initiatives to bridge gaps and build trust. As the structured part of the program neared its conclusion, Judge Washington prepared for the final phase, determining what justice would look like in this case. The traditional metrics of punishment and compensation seemed inadequate given the transformation that had taken place. She knew her ruling needed to reflect both the seriousness of the original incident and the positive changes it had sparked. The final session was approaching, and with it, the judge's ruling that would set a precedent for how similar cases might be handled in the future. The community waited, watching to see if this new approach to justice could provide a lasting foundation for change. As the community justice program entered its final week, tension filled the air around the courthouse. Judge Washington had called for a special session that would bring together everyone touched by the incident. The community center's largest room was packed with observers, from local residents to law enforcement officials from neighboring districts who had come to witness the program's conclusion. Michelle sat in the front row, surrounded by her family. Her children, now more confident than fearful, watched the proceedings with keen interest. Her oldest had become something of a youth spokesperson, recently speaking at his school about how communities could work together to create positive change. Officer Chen entered wearing his full uniform, a deliberate choice that carried symbolic weight. Unlike the night of the arrest, his posture now showed humility rather than aggressive authority. He had spent the previous evening with his parents, explaining to them why this moment mattered so much. In our culture, making mistakes brings shame, he had told them. But hiding from those mistakes brings even greater shame. What I've learned through this program is that acknowledging wrong and working to make it right, that brings honor. Lieutenant Rivera sat nearby, a thick binder in her lap containing the newly revised training protocols that had emerged from this process. The receipt protocol had evolved into a comprehensive approach to community policing, with departments across the state requesting copies. Mr. Patel had closed his store early to attend, bringing with him statistics showing how his community engagement initiatives had actually improved his business while reducing shoplifting incidents. When people feel respected, he told a local reporter before the session, they respect you back. Judge Washington began the session with an unexpected move. Instead of taking her usual position at the front, she sat in the circle with everyone else. Today, she announced, we're not here to hand down a ruling from on high. We're here to acknowledge what we've learned and decide together how to move forward. The session opened with community members sharing how the program had affected their daily lives. A teenage boy spoke about how officers now wave to kids at the basketball court instead of just driving past. An elderly woman described feeling comfortable asking police for help when she got lost walking home. Michelle's voice carried particular weight when she stood to speak. 3 months ago, I was handcuffed in front of my community over a receipt that blew away in the wind. Today, I'm standing here as a partner in changing how our police department works with our community. My children have watched their mother turn pain into progress. Officer Chen's testimony brought many to tears. He spoke not just about that night, but about the journey since then. I came into law enforcement wanting to protect people, he said. But I had to learn that protection without understanding isn't really protection at all. It's just control. The most powerful moment came when Michelle's middle child, who had been quiet throughout the program, raised her hand to speak. Judge Washington nodded encouragingly, and the 9-year-old stood. My mom always taught us to tell the truth and say sorry when we do something wrong, she said simply. Officer Chen did that. He's learning, like we learn at school. And now when I see police officers, I remember that they can learn too. Lieutenant Rivera presented the concrete changes implemented in the department: mandatory community engagement hours for all officers, revised training protocols, and a new civilian oversight committee that included Michelle as a founding member. This incident could have torn our community apart, she noted. Instead, it's brought us together in ways we never expected. The program had also sparked changes beyond law enforcement. Local businesses had created a network to better communicate with both the community and police. Schools had implemented new curricula about civic engagement and conflict resolution. Even the city council had passed measures supporting community-based justice initiatives. Judge Washington listened to all the testimonies, taking careful notes. The traditional legal system would have settled this case months ago with a lawsuit and perhaps a suspension. Instead, this approach had created ripples of change throughout the community. As the session progressed, it became clear that the program's impact would extend far beyond its official conclusion. Other communities had begun implementing similar programs, using Springfield's experience as a template. A documentary filmmaker had been following the process, capturing the transformation for a wider audience. Michelle's attorney, Catherine Walsh, presented a comprehensive report on the program's outcomes. Beyond the obvious metrics of reduced complaints and improved community relations, she highlighted the less tangible but equally important changes in attitudes and perceptions. What we've witnessed here isn't just conflict resolution, Walsh explained. It's the creation of a new model for justice that recognizes the humanity in everyone involved. This program hasn't just addressed one incident, it's transformed how an entire community thinks about justice and accountability. Officer Chen's supervisors reported on his progress, noting that he had become an advocate for community-centered policing within the department. His willingness to speak openly about his mistakes and learning process had encouraged other officers to examine their own biases and assumptions. The program had even influenced police recruitment. Applications now included questions about community engagement and cultural competency. The department had begun actively seeking candidates with social work and community service backgrounds, recognizing that effective policing required more than just tactical training. As the session drew to a close, Judge Washington prepared to announce her final decision. But everyone present understood that whatever ruling she made would be less important than the changes already set in motion. The true verdict had been written in the transformed relationships between police and community, in the new policies and procedures, and in the way people now looked at each other with understanding rather than suspicion. The judge looked around the room, taking in the faces of everyone who had been part of this journey. Her ruling would need to balance accountability with the progress made, ensuring that the momentum for positive change continued beyond this case. The community held its breath, waiting to hear how she would formalize the transformation they had all witnessed and been part of. The afternoon sun streamed through the community center's windows as Judge Patricia Washington rose to deliver her ruling. The room fell into a profound silence, with only the soft whirring of the documentary crew's cameras breaking the stillness. This wasn't just a verdict, it was a moment that would define how justice could work when communities chose healing over division. Before I announce my decision, Judge Washington began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room, I want to acknowledge what has happened here over the past months. We've witnessed something extraordinary, not just the handling of an incident, but the transformation of a community. She picked up a thick folder, filled with documentation from the program sessions. The easy path would have been to process this case through traditional channels. Officer Chen would have faced disciplinary action, Ms. Thompson would have received a settlement, and we would have called it justice. But would anything have really changed? The judge paused, looking directly at Michelle and her children, then at Officer Chen. Instead, you all chose the harder path. You chose to confront uncomfortable truths, to listen to painful stories, and to work together toward real change. That kind of courage deserves more than a conventional ruling. She then outlined the official components of her decision. Officer Chen would serve a 30-day suspension, but it would be structured differently than typical disciplinary actions. Instead of staying home, he would spend those days working with community organizations, including 15 days at the local youth center and 15 days with family support services. Additionally, she continued, the department will provide Ms. Thompson with fair compensation for the night she spent in custody and the distress caused to her family. But more importantly, we're establishing the Thompson Initiative for Community Policing, with initial funding from the department's training budget. The initiative, she explained, would institutionalize the lessons learned during the program. It would include regular community police dialogue sessions, youth engagement programs, and ongoing training for officers in cultural competency and bias recognition. Michelle would serve as the paid executive director, working part-time while maintaining her other jobs. Officer Chen, Judge Washington addressed him directly, "Your participation in this program has shown that accountability doesn't have to mean the end of a career. It can be the beginning of a better one. You will continue to serve as a police officer, but with additional responsibilities as a peer trainer in the new initiative." The judge then addressed the broader implications of the case. The department would implement mandatory cooling-off periods before making arrests in nonviolent situations, requiring officers to verify facts and consult with supervisors. The receipt protocol would become standard procedure, emphasizing investigation over immediate action. Mr. Patel's community engagement model will be expanded to create business community police partnerships throughout the city, she announced. His store's success in building trust and reducing incidents will serve as a template for others. Lieutenant Rivera's revised training protocols would be implemented department-wide, with regular evaluations and updates based on community feedback. The Civilian Oversight Committee, with Michelle as a key member, would have real power to review policies and recommend changes. But perhaps the most important part of this ruling, Judge Washington continued, concerns the children. She looked at Michelle's 3 kids, who sat up straighter under her gaze. "Your mother turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Your courage in sharing your stories has helped us understand what needs to change." The judge announced the creation of a youth council that would meet regularly with police leadership, ensuring that young voices would always be part of community policing discussions. Michelle's oldest child was invited to serve as one of the inaugural members. As for the documentary being filmed, she acknowledged the cameras. All proceeds from its distribution will go to fund similar programs in other communities. This story needs to be shared, not just as a record of what went wrong, but as a blueprint for how to make it right. The ruling included specific metrics for measuring success, regular surveys of community trust, tracking of complaint statistics, and independent audits of police-community interactions. But it also emphasized the less tangible measures, the quality of daily interactions, the willingness of residents to approach officers for help, and the involvement of police in community events. "I want to be clear," Judge Washington emphasized, "this ruling isn't the end of the process. It's a framework for continuing the work you've all started. True justice isn't a single decision, it's an ongoing commitment to doing better, to being better." She then addressed the wider audience, including the visiting law enforcement officials and community leaders from other districts. "What we've created here isn't just a local solution. It's a model that can be adapted and implemented anywhere people are willing to do the hard work of real change." The judge's final words resonated through the room. "This case began with a lost receipt, but it has given us a receipt for something far more valuable, a way to transform conflict into connection, fear into understanding, and mistakes into opportunities for growth." As she concluded, the room remained silent for a moment before erupting into applause. Michelle hugged her children, tears streaming down her face. Officer Chen stood at attention, his own eyes glistening. Lieutenant Rivera was already making notes about implementing the new protocols. Mr. Patel, who had become a beloved figure in this process, moved through the crowd, shaking hands and already making plans for the first business community meeting under the new initiative. The documentary crew captured it all, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would inspire other communities to follow this path. Outside the community center, reporters gathered to share the news of this unprecedented ruling. But the real story wasn't in the official decision, it was in the faces of the people leaving the building, in their determined expressions and hopeful smiles, in the way officers and residents naturally grouped together to discuss next steps. The sun was setting as Michelle and Officer Chen found themselves standing side by side on the steps. 3 months ago, they had been on opposite sides of handcuffs. Now they were partners in a new approach to justice, their story a testament to what was possible when communities chose understanding over division, growth over punishment, and hope over fear. 1 month after Judge Washington's ruling, the changes in Springfield were already visible. The Thompson Initiative for Community Policing had taken over a renovated storefront in the heart of downtown, its windows decorated with community artwork and its doors open to all. Inside, the space buzzed with activity as residents and officers worked together to implement the judge's vision. Michelle's transition to her role as executive director had been surprisingly smooth. Her experience juggling multiple jobs had prepared her well for managing various projects simultaneously. Today, she was leading a morning meeting with a mix of community leaders and police officers, discussing the first results of the new protocols. In just 4 weeks, she reported, pointing to a chart on the wall, we've seen a 40% reduction in confrontational encounters during routine stops. Officers are taking more time to assess situations, and residents are feeling more comfortable asking questions during interactions. Officer Chen, fresh from his 30-day special assignment, shared his experiences working with youth at the community center. The kids there taught me more than any police academy training, he admitted. They showed me how a simple interaction with law enforcement can affect someone for years, good or bad. It's changed how I approach every situation now. The Youth Council, where Michelle's oldest child served alongside other young community members, had already made its presence felt. They had proposed changes to how officers approached groups of young people in parks and recreational areas, leading to the creation of positive contact guidelines that encouraged friendly interaction over surveillance. Lieutenant Rivera's training department had become a hub of innovation. The receipt protocol, now formally known as the community verification process, had been refined based on real-world implementation. Officers were required to complete scenario-based training that emphasized de-escalation and community awareness. "Watch this," Rivera told a visiting police chief, playing a body camera video. It showed a recent incident where an officer encountered a situation similar to Michelle's. Instead of immediate confrontation, the officer engaged in conversation, verified information with the store, and turned a potential arrest into a positive community interaction. Mr. Patel's business network had grown to include 30 local stores, all implementing the new community engagement model. His shop had become a case study in community policing, with officers regularly stopping by for coffee and conversation with customers. The security cameras that had once caught Michelle's wrongful arrest now recorded daily scenes of positive police-community interaction. The documentary crew, still following the story's development, captured a powerful moment when Michelle's youngest daughter had a minor bicycle accident outside the police station. 2 officers immediately rushed to help, their genuine concern evident in their gentle approach and careful attention. The girl's lack of fear and the officer's natural compassion demonstrated how far things had come. The Thompson Initiative had also started addressing systemic issues. Working with local businesses, they created a job training program for at-risk youth, with police officers serving as mentors. The program helped break down barriers while providing practical opportunities for community members. "This is what community policing should look like," Michelle explained to a group of visiting social workers. "It's not just about handling crime, it's about preventing it by building relationships and addressing needs before they become problems." Officer Chen's peer training sessions had become unexpectedly popular among his fellow officers. His willingness to share his mistakes and learning experience had created a safe space for others to examine their own biases and assumptions. The department had seen a notable increase in officers voluntarily signing up for additional community engagement training. The Civilian Oversight Committee, meeting weekly in the initiative's conference room, had evolved into a true partnership between police and community members. They reviewed body camera footage not just for potential problems, but also to identify and celebrate positive interactions that could serve as training examples. Michelle's middle child had started a school newspaper column called Community Corner, where students shared their experiences with local law enforcement. The stories increasingly focused on positive encounters, officers attending school events, helping with community projects, or simply taking time to play basketball with kids at the park. The impact extended beyond direct police interactions. Local schools reported improved attendance and participation in after-school programs, partly attributed to reduced anxiety about police presence in the neighborhood. Parents felt more comfortable letting their children play outside, knowing that officers in the area were there to protect, not intimidate. Judge Washington's regular check-ins revealed steady progress. The metrics she had established were showing positive trends, but more importantly, the qualitative changes were evident in daily life. She often walked through different neighborhoods, observing the subtle but significant shifts in how officers and residents interacted. "What impresses me most," she told her clerk after one such walk, "is how natural it all feels now. We're not seeing forced politeness or staged interactions. This is genuine community building." The Thompson Initiative had also started addressing more complex issues. They launched a mental health response team that paired officers with social workers for certain calls, reducing confrontational encounters and providing better support for residents in crisis. The program quickly became a model for other departments. Michelle's role had expanded to include speaking at police academies across the state. Her story, combined with practical insights from implementing the initiative's programs, provided powerful training material for future officers. She always made sure to emphasize that the goal wasn't to avoid accountability, but to build systems that made harmful encounters less likely. Officer Chen, completing his regular patrol shift, found himself handling situations differently. When he encountered a teenage boy running from a convenience store, his first instinct was no longer to chase. Instead, he called the store, verified the situation, and discovered the boy was rushing to get medicine for his grandmother, much like Michelle had been that fateful night. The initiative's office had become a community hub, hosting everything from police community coffee hours to youth mentoring sessions. The walls were covered with photos of successful programs and positive interactions, including a particularly moving image of Michelle and Officer Chin speaking together at a local school. As the first month's data was compiled, the numbers told a compelling story: complaints down, community engagement up, and a measurable increase in residents reporting feeling safe in their interactions with law enforcement. But the real success was visible in the small, daily interactions, the casual waves between officers and residents, the comfortable conversations at local businesses, the sense of trust slowly being rebuilt. The documentary team, preparing to release their first feature on the program's implementation, had captured countless moments of transformation. But perhaps the most powerful was a simple scene. Michelle's children walking home from school, passing a police patrol car, and exchanging friendly waves with the officers inside, a small gesture that represented enormous change. 6 months after Judge Washington's ruling, Springfield hosted a national conference on community policing. The community center, where everything had started, was filled with law enforcement officials, community leaders, and activists from across the country, all eager to learn from what had become known as the Springfield model. Michelle stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse audience. Her journey from wrongfully arrested single mother to nationally recognized community leader still felt surreal sometimes. Behind her sat Judge Washington, Officer Chen, Lieutenant Rivera, and Mr. Patel, the unlikely team that had helped transform a potential tragedy into a blueprint for change. 6 months ago, I was handcuffed on a street corner over a receipt that blew away in the wind, Michelle began, her voice steady and strong. Today, I'm here to tell you about what happened after those handcuffs came off, not just for me, but for an entire community. The Thompson Initiative had exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Crime rates had dropped significantly, not through aggressive policing, but through improved community relationships and proactive problem-solving. The program had been featured in national news, with other cities sending representatives to study its success. Officer Chen, now promoted to Community Relations Sergeant, shared statistics that drew gasps from the audience. Use of force incidents had dropped by 70%. Civilian complaints were down by 65%. But most importantly, community engagement had increased across all demographics. These numbers tell a story, he explained, but the real changes are in the things we can't measure. It's in the way children wave to officers instead of running away. It's in the trust we see in people's eyes when they approach us for help. It's in the community we've built together. The documentary about Springfield's transformation had premiered the previous week, playing to a packed house at the local theater. The audience had watched in silence as the story unfolded, from the night of Michelle's arrest to the current state of police-community relations. The most powerful scenes weren't the big meetings or official changes, they were the small, daily interactions that showed how deeply things had shifted. Mr. Patel's business network had expanded to include over 50 local stores, all implementing the community engagement model. His original security footage of Michelle's arrest was now used in police academies nationwide as a teaching tool, alongside footage of how similar situations were handled under the new protocols. Every receipt that flies away in the wind is an opportunity, Mr. Patel told the conference attendees, drawing knowing laughs. An opportunity to show patience, to verify facts, to treat each other with dignity. Simple things make the biggest difference. Lieutenant Rivera's training programs had been adopted by police departments in 3 neighboring states. The receipt protocol, now formally adopted into police procedure manuals across the country, had prevented countless confrontations and built countless bridges. Michelle's children had become symbols of the program's success in their own right. Her oldest, now 13, had spoken at youth leadership conferences about the importance of community engagement. The middle child school newspaper column had been picked up by the city paper as a regular feature. Even her youngest had appeared in educational videos about positive police interactions. Judge Washington's innovative approach to justice had sparked a movement in the legal community. Other judges were implementing similar programs, adapting the Springfield model to their own community's needs. The focus on transformation over punishment was showing promising results across the country. The Youth Council had expanded to include representatives from every neighborhood in Springfield. Their insights had led to changes in everything from patrol schedules to community program development. Officers now received regular training from youth members, learning to see situations through young people's eyes. The most powerful moment for me, Officer Chen shared during his conference presentation, wasn't any official success. It was the day Michelle's youngest daughter skinned her knee in the park, and without hesitation, ran to me for help. That trust, that's what we're building here. The Thompson Initiative Office had become a national training center, hosting officers and community leaders from across the country. Visitors often remarked on the atmosphere, the easy interaction between police and residents, the walls covered with community artwork and success stories, the open-door policy that made everyone feel welcome. Michelle's role had evolved beyond Springfield. She had testified before state legislatures, consulted with police departments nationwide, and even contributed to federal guidelines on community policing. But she still maintained her connection to the community, including regular shifts at the diner where everyone now knew her as a local hero. Success isn't just in the big changes, she explained to the conference attendees. It's in the officer who takes time to listen to a teenager's problems. It's in the store owner who helps mediate a dispute before calling police. It's in the trust that builds when we see each other as people first. The conference concluded with a ceremony honoring the original participants in the program. Judge Washington received a standing ovation for her innovative ruling, but she quickly redirected the attention to the community members who had made it work. Real change, she reminded everyone, doesn't come from courtrooms or police stations. It comes from people willing to do the hard work of understanding each other, of moving past mistakes, of building something better together. As the conference ended and visitors returned to their own communities, armed with new ideas and inspiration, Springfield continued its journey. The Thompson Initiative had become a permanent part of the city's fabric, its principles woven into daily life. Michelle's final words to the conference captured the spirit of everything they had achieved. That night, when the receipt blew away in the wind, it could have been just another story of injustice. Instead, it became a receipt for change, proof that when we choose understanding over fear, when we work together instead of against each other, we can transform our communities. And that's something worth more than any paper receipt could ever show. As the participants filed out of the community center, they passed a new mural on the wall. It showed a receipt floating away in the wind, but instead of leading to conflict, it transformed into a bridge between police and community members, with children playing safely beneath it. The artist had captured in paint what Springfield had proven in practice, that even the most difficult moments could become foundations for positive change.